Sin has a tendency to separate each one of us into our own self-centered worlds. Sin isolates me from you, and sin has a tendency to isolate you from me. And sin whispers in my ear, Andy, spend all your time and resources on you, you'll be happier. Andy, spend all your time and resources on you, it will fill you up. And yet observation, experience, and even investigation says the very opposite, that you are most filled up when you pour yourself out. Why? Because this is the way your Heavenly Father designed you to operate, and sin has broken that. And we fall for the lie that if it's all about me, ultimately, I am enough to fill myself up. But time and experience and research shows that is exactly not the case. If you want to be happy, you have got to find a way to give yourself away. If you want to be happy, you have got to find a way to give yourself away. You will never, ever be happy as long as it's about you, even when you become the best possible version of you possible. And again, you don't need to look any further than the happiest people you know, because some of the happiest people you know are also some of the most selfless people. And you wouldn't want to look like them because you exercise far more than they do, but you're upset all the time and they just seem to be happy. And you wouldn't want their income because they don't make as much money as you do, but they seem to be at peace with what they have and they're at peace with what they don't have. And you're striving and you're frustrated and you're mad all the time. And you look at things in their life that you wouldn't trade with, but they've got something you don't have. When you scratch beneath the surface, they have found a way to give their life away. Happy people find a way to give their life away. Now, the Apostle Paul, in a letter to these Christians that lived in Galatia, a Roman province, in the first century, the book of Galatians, we call it the book of Galatians. It's actually just a letter that he wrote to these Christians that lived in this Roman province. It's full of rich theology, and I want to just drop into a piece of theology that I don't want to get into the theology. I just want to get into an observation that he makes and a contrast he makes between two different approaches to living. Now, of course, the Apostle Paul, because he was writing to Christians, uses some Christian words and some theological terms. But instead of getting lost in the theology today, even though these are very rich verses, I just want you to look really at two approaches to life that he talks about and two lists of things that he associates with each of these approaches to life. Because herein is the stark contrast between living for myself, trying to fill myself up and make myself happy, as opposed to pouring myself out and finding happiness. Last week we talked about pleasure. Remember that? And we said if you prioritize pleasure over happiness, you'll have neither. But if you prioritize happiness over pleasure, you get both. And once again, the Apostle Paul points to that idea that, again, it's not intuitive, but you live long enough and you begin to realize just how true it is. So here's what he says. We're going to drop in right in the middle of a discussion, which is a little dangerous to do, but we'll just see what happens. Here's what he says in Galatians chapter 5. He says, the acts of the flesh are obvious. Now, if you're a Bible person, you've probably read this verse or heard this verse before. If the New Testament's new to you, this little Greek word flesh, in other translations, it says the sinful nature. So when Paul says the acts of the flesh or the acts of the sinful nature, he's saying, if you were just to do whatever you wanted to do, if you were able to get by with anything and there wouldn't be any consequences and your wife would never find out or your husband would never find out or your kids would never find out or it wouldn't come back to haunt you, if you were to just go with your natural impulses and just do what you want to do, when you want to do it, with whom you want to do it, and you weren't ever going to run out of money, if you just kind of went with you, if you decided it's all about me, he says, here's what they are. The acts of the flesh are obvious. He says, I don't even need to list them because we already know what they're going to be. But he says, I'll list them anyway. The acts of the flesh are obvious. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, that's just excessive sexual behavior. Idolatry is basically trying to get the gods to do my bidding. That's what idolatry is. Some of us, even as Christians, pray sort of idolatrous prayers. God, what do I need to do to get you to do what I want you to do? That's idolatry. Witchcraft, simply trying to harness the forces of nature to do my bidding. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. He says, if you were just to pick your feet up and just kind of go with the flow of society and to go with the flow of yourself and to go with the flow of your natural inclinations, That's what it looks like. And here's the synopsis of everything in those two verses. This is so important. This is pleasure at someone else's expense. This is always pleasure at someone else's expense. When you give into your selfishness, it is pleasure for you at someone else's expense. Someone always pays a price when you give in to your natural, selfish inclinations. Even when you get by with it, even when you don't get caught, even when no one holds you accountable, somebody suffers. Pleasure at someone else's expense. Why? Because all the things that have to do with the acts, with the desires of the flesh are all associated with, this is so important, they're all associated with appetites. They're all associated with appetites. And appetites, as we've said in the past, are never fully and finally satisfied. When you feed an appetite, it what? It grows. That's right. When you feed an appetite, it grows. And when you can't satisfy an appetite, you become frustrated. You become angry. And so the Apostle Paul says, our sinful nature, our flesh, our selfishness, just giving into whatever I want. If you say yes to that long enough, as hard as you try to fill yourself up, it will leave you wanting more. It's an appetite that is never fully and finally satisfied. Whether it's an appetite for sex, an appetite for stuff, an appetite for recognition, an appetite for getting the credit you think you're due, whatever it is, those are appetites that are never fully and finally satisfied. And if you give yourself to those appetites, you just end up frustrated, not happy. He says, but, then he contrasts it. He says, but the fruit of the Spirit, and look at the contrast. Fruit of the Spirit, acts of the flesh. Fruit of the Spirit, acts of the flesh. The fruit of the Spirit refers to when you finally say to your Heavenly Father, God, I am tired of living for myself. It's not working. God, I'm tired of trying to fill myself up, because the harder I work to fill myself up, the less happy I am and the less full I get to be. The harder I chase after trying to satisfy all these appetites, they're never satisfied, and I'm frustrated and I'm angry and I'm in a bad mood, and I don't understand it because I have more money than I've ever had. I have nicer clothes than I've ever had. I'm in better shape than I've ever been in. And yet there's on the inside, I just feel like I'm constantly striving. In contrast to Heavenly Father, thy will be done in me. The Apostle Paul says the fruit of the Spirit versus the acts of the flesh. Now here are the fruit of the Spirit. He says the fruit of the Spirit, that is when you finally relax and say, God, it's not all about me. God, it's not all about what I can get. It's not all about satisfying. God, it's about you and it's about others. He says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy. Some of you have memorized these as children. Love, joy, peace. This is forbearance, means patience. I'm going to go at your pace, not mine. Kindness, I'm going to gear down so that you're comfortable. Goodness, I'm just going to do the right thing even if it costs me. Faithfulness, you can trust me, you can trust me, you can trust me. Gentleness, I'm going to leverage my power for your benefit. And self-control. He says, when you decide to quit pursuing the desires of the flesh or your sinful nature or that selfish part of you that all of us can identify in a heartbeat, he said, when you finally relax and say, Heavenly Father, I want your will. I want you to live your life through me. He says, this is what God is going to produce through you. And then one of the most brilliant statements of all ancient literature, one of the most brilliant statements in all of the New Testament. This next statement is so powerful. Here's what he says. Against such things, there is no law. I'm telling you, this is one of the richest statements you'll ever read. Let me go ahead and put the list up here. Here's why I say that. Look at this. Here's what Paul says. Paul is saying, you were made for this. This is the environment in which you flourish. Imagine a family. Imagine your current family characterized by love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Imagine a family characterized by those things. Would you be happy? Yes, you'd be happy. And Paul's saying, the reason you intuitively know, wouldn't that be great, is because you were designed for this. You are designed to live in a community of people, in your physical community, that's characterized by these characteristics. This is a community where the police basically direct traffic and they have to talk people into going because they want to wait for the other person to go first. This is a community, imagine. This is a community. This is why what Paul said is so brilliant. This is a community where there is almost no need for any law. Because if I'm for what's in it for you, and if I'm committed to what's in your best interest, and you're committed to what's in my best interest, then we can get through anything. We can figure anything out. We can solve any problem. We can all sleep at night without any fear. And if you can just imagine that within your family, or imagine that within your community, or imagine that in a nation, can you just sense where the stress level and the anxiety level would begin to decrease? Can you just sense or imagine how much happier you would be, your family would be, our communities would be, our nation would be? Paul says, this is what you were created for. You were made for this. Listen, selfishness is natural. Selfishness is natural, but it is not by design. Selfishness comes naturally, but it is not by design. You were created to live a life characterized by these things. Family works better when characterized by these things. Communities work better when they're characterized by these things. And nations work better when they're characterized by these things. And the Apostle Paul says, I'm inviting you into a selfless way of living. And it may not be intuitive, but the more selfless you are, the happier you will be. You need more evidence? Here's a question for you. More evidence. How do we measure the value of a life? How do we measure the value of a life? Let me just make it real clear, okay? So you're at a funeral, okay? And somebody stands up to speak about the deceased. Here's some things they never talk about. How immoral they were, impure, indulgent, hateful, jealous, angry, selfish, argumentative, envious, and how often they got drunk. You never talk about that kind of stuff. You never say, you know what, I'm telling you, this guy made such an extraordinary contribution to our community. He slept with every woman he could get in the stack with, you know. He was angry all the time. He was jealous. He was so selfish, envious, and when he wasn't drunk, he was asleep. I mean, this was like he was just inspired. We were just all inspired by his life. These are the things we never bring up at the end because we know it. We know intuitively. These things have no value. They make no contribution. Listen, they are all consumptive. They are all pleasure at someone else's expense. We know they add nothing to society. They add nothing to a life. And no one whose life is characterized by these things is happy, and they don't make the people around them happy. We know this. And yet every single day I'm tempted, just like you are, to get up every single day and consume all of my time and all of my life on me in an attempt to be happier and more fulfilled. And our Heavenly Father just puts his hands on his hips and shakes his head like, okay, when are you going to figure this out? Selfishness is natural, but you are not designed for selfishness. Selfishness ultimately will kill you. The value of a life is always measured by how much of it was given away. That's what we celebrate. That's intuitively what we know is most valuable. Listen. Giving your life away is what makes you great. When a person gives a portion of their life away, when they live a selfless life, we look at that individual and we think, that was a great man, that was a great woman. And you know what else is true of them? And they were so content. They were so happy. Somehow they discovered the secret that pouring out is what fills an individual up. If you want to be happy, you got to figure out a way to give your life away. If you want to be happy, and I don't mean, twice a year, you go on some kind of thing because your office has some kind of thing and you got to go because the boss is there looking to make sure everybody's there. No, you've got to find a way to systematically give your life away, just like you systematically consume, just like you systematically exercise, just like you systematically look in the mirror 25 times a day to make sure you got it going on. You've got to find a way to systematically give your life away. One more illustration, okay? Don't be this. Okay, don't be this. This is a picture of the Dead Sea. Now, most of you know the Dead Sea is dead because the water comes in, but no water goes where? Out. That's right. The Jordan River dumps into the Dead Sea, and it's such a low place on the planet, all the water stays right there. Everybody knows that. The Dead Sea is dead. Nothing can live in the Dead Sea because water goes in, no water goes out. But here's something you didn't know. Check this next picture out. The Dead Sea is drying up. As we sit here, they are pumping thousands and thousands of gallons into the Dead Sea to try to save the Dead Sea, and it is a mystery. Because about 80 miles, 87 miles north of the Dead Sea is the Sea of Galilee, where people are on, water skiing and jet skiing and, and wakeboarding and on boats and fishing. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful resort kind of environment all over the Sea of Galilee. But the Sea of Galilee has water coming in. The Sea of Galilee has water coming out. It's a living, beautiful place. And that same water travels about 87 miles down to the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is shrinking. Now tell me, how can the Sea of Galilee that has water going in and water going out survive? And how is it that a sea that has water flowing in and no water flowing out, how is it that it's shrinking? In fact, if you visit the Sea of Galilee, you can drive along several roads, and hundreds of yards to your left is the Sea of Galilee, and about 40 yards to your right are cliffs, and they have lines up on the cliffs saying that's how high the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea used to be. It's shrinking. How can that be? How can it be that something to where water is pouring in and no water is going out, how is it that it's getting smaller? My friends, if you don't figure out how to give your life away, you are the Dead Sea. It all comes in, nothing goes out, and you become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and more frustrated and more frustrated and more unhappy and more unhappy and more happy. And you will fall for the lie every single time. If only I looked like her, if only I'd married like him, if only I drove one of those, and you begin to put together the composite person, and you think if I could ever become Frankenstein, I know I would finally be happy. But you were designed by God to give your life away. You were made for more than you. It's not intuitive, but it's true. If it's all about you, you'll never be happy. You need more than you. Again, even if you get yourself exactly like you want to get yourself will never be enough. You cannot acquire, you cannot consume, and you cannot exercise your way to happiness. And here's why, and I'm done. Because you were designed by the giver of life to give your life away. You were created by the creator of life to give your life away. You were made by the maker of life to give your life away. You were created in such a way that you will never find fulfillment until you find a way to periodically dump out what's inside of you for the benefit of somebody else. That's where you find life.